That night, I wasn't supposed to be near the lake, but maybe fate wanted me there, to see what I was never meant to see. The moon floated high, silvering the water's surface, when I saw her silhouette slip from the trees. My daughter-in-law, Megan. She had a suitcase in her hands, heavy and dark, and she was struggling. My heart slammed in my chest as she dragged it toward the water's edge, her arms trembling under its weight. She paused, looked over her shoulder as though listening for someone. Then, with a sudden lurch, she flung it into the lake. It hit the water with a splash, then sank. She turned and sped off in her car as headlights cut through the mist. I stood frozen for a moment, then ran, the cold air stinging my lungs. As I reached the bank, I heard a dull thud just beneath the surface. I plunged in, hands clawing at cold water, and hauled it out. The suitcase was drenched, locked tight, heavier than I anticipated. My fingers shook as I fumbled with the zipper, prying it open. I gasped, heart pounding, and whispered, "My goodness, it can't be what I'm thinking. What I saw inside." I nearly collapsed. Stay with me until the end. What's inside that suitcase will change everything. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. My name is Grace, and for most of my life, I thought I understood what family meant. I raised my son, Ethan, with the same values my parents gave me: hard work, honesty, and kindness. He was my pride, my only child, and after his father passed away, we grew even closer. We shared dinners every Sunday, laughed over old stories, and talked about everything until the day he met Megan. She was beautiful, confident, and always seemed to know the right thing to say. I wanted to like her. I really did. Ethan was happy, and that was all I ever wanted. But there was something about her that unsettled me from the very beginning. Maybe it was the way she corrected him in front of people, or how her smile disappeared the moment she turned away from him. Still, I told myself she just needed time to adjust, that love sometimes came wrapped in complicated packaging. But love should never make you feel like a stranger in your own family. After they got married, Ethan and Megan bought a house just a few miles from mine. I thought that meant I'd see them more often, but it turned out to be the opposite. At first, Megan would invite me for dinner once a week, but those dinners slowly faded into polite excuses. When I did visit, she always seemed to be in a hurry, checking her phone, glancing at the clock, cutting off conversations just as they began. Once, I brought over a homemade pie, the kind Ethan had loved since he was a boy. She smiled tightly and said, "Oh, Grace, you really shouldn't have gone through all that trouble. We're trying to eat cleaner now." Ethan said nothing. He just looked down at his plate. I told myself it didn't matter, but I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. Every little thing began to feel like a reminder that I no longer belonged. Ethan was an engineer, brilliant, responsible, the kind of man any mother would be proud of. But over time, I noticed something different about him. His laughter didn't sound the same. He seemed distracted, preoccupied. He'd come by to fix things around my house, but rarely stayed for coffee. When I asked if everything was all right, he'd smile faintly and say, "Just work, Mom. You know how it is." Then, as months passed, his visits stopped altogether. He began traveling for work more often, or at least that's what Megan told me. She'd call sometimes, always in that calm, rehearsed tone, saying, "He's busy, Grace. Don't worry. You raised a good man. He's fine." But there was a coldness in her voice that made my stomach twist. I wanted to believe her, but a mother knows when something is wrong. It wasn't just me who noticed the change. My neighbors, the Andersons, mentioned one afternoon that they'd heard shouting from Ethan's house late at night. I brushed it off at first. Every couple argues, I thought. But when I asked Ethan about it, he said nothing, just changed the subject. A week later, I stopped by to drop off some of his favorite cookies, and Megan answered the door, standing there with her arms folded. "Now's not a good time, Grace," she said quickly, blocking my view of the hallway. I could hear something, a drawer slamming shut, maybe, but before I could ask, she smiled that same perfect smile and closed the door. That night, I sat in my living room staring at my phone, waiting for a call that never came. Then came the last real conversation I had with Ethan. It was a chilly morning, and he'd stopped by unexpectedly. He looked exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes. We sat by the kitchen window, and he barely touched his coffee. "Mom, he said quietly. "If anything ever happens to me, promise me you'll stay strong." I laughed it off at first, thinking he was joking, but his expression didn't change. There was something desperate in his eyes, something I didn't understand then. I tried to ask what he meant, but he stood up, hugged me tightly, and said, "I'll explain soon." That was the last time I saw him alive. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. No calls, no visits. I tried reaching out voicemails, messages, but every time, Megan would respond instead, always with that same line, "He's busy. Don't worry." Eventually, even she stopped answering. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one night, staring at his old high school photo, the one where he was grinning in that oversized jacket, and wondering how everything had gone so wrong so quietly. I started to feel like I was losing my mind. Maybe I'd been too controlling. Maybe Ethan needed space. But deep down, I knew. Something wasn't right. I'd wake up at night thinking I heard his car in the driveway, only to look out the window and see nothing but darkness. My friends told me to let it go, to give them time. But how do you let go when every instinct inside you is screaming that your child is in danger? Before we go further, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt that someone close to you was hiding something? That feeling in your gut that something's off, even when everyone around you says you're overreacting? Don't ignore it. It's your heart trying to protect you. And if you've ever trusted that instinct, tell me in the comments. I read every single one, and please hit that subscribe button now. Because what I discovered next, no mother should ever have to face. If you choose not to, then at least stay to the end, so when the truth unfolds, you'll understand why silence can destroy more than lies ever could. I used to believe silence was peaceful, a sign of calm, of safety, but lately, silence had turned into something else. It felt like the walls were holding their breath, like the house itself was hiding something from me. Ethan's calls had stopped. His messages, gone. His laughter that once filled my evenings was replaced by the hollow echo of my own voice when I called his name. Every time I dialed his number, it went straight to voicemail. Megan said he was on a project. But what kind of project kept a husband from his wife for months and from his mother forever? At first, I wanted to believe her. I truly did. But then, I started to notice things small, almost invisible things that began to stitch a darker picture together. Late at night, when the neighborhood slept, Megan would slip out of the house. Her car moved quietly down the road, lights off, heading toward the lake. Always the lake. When she returned, her boots were muddy. Sometimes there was a faint smell of bleach that lingered in the garage. It clung to the air, sharp and sterile, as if something had been scrubbed clean, too clean. One morning, when she left for errands, I walked into the garage. Trash bags sat piled in the corner, heavy, bulging. One had torn slightly open, and inside, I saw what looked like a man's shirt. One I could have sworn belonged to Ethan. The concrete floor was smeared faintly with something dark, and there, near the basement door, was a thin line of dried mud and something else I didn't want to name. That door had never been locked before. But now, it was always shut tight, with a faint glow of light under it long past midnight. And sometimes, when the house was quiet, I could swear I heard movement down there. Soft, measured steps. Then the whispers started. From neighbors, quiet ones. They said Megan had been selling men's things online, clothes, tools, watches. I asked myself, whose? That evening, I asked her gently, "When's Ethan coming home?" She looked at me too calm, too still. "He's on a long project," she said. "Don't worry." Her voice carried no warmth, and the way she said long made it sound like she meant forever. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, hearing Ethan's voice replay in my head, his last words to me before he vanished. "Mom, if you don't hear from me, don't trust anyone." The next day, I searched the house again. My hands trembled as I opened drawers, one by one, until I found something that made my heart stop. Ethan's wedding ring. It lay inside a velvet box in Megan's drawer, glinting softly in the morning light. The same ring he swore he'd never take off. I remember sitting down right there on the floor, clutching it in my hand, feeling its warmth, or maybe it was just mine. I didn't cry. I couldn't. My tears had turned into questions long ago. From that moment, I started writing everything down. Every time she left the house, every strange smell, every whisper of movement from the basement. I filled pages, dates, times, details. My proof. When I finally called the police, they told me my son was fine. His wife says he's on business in Seattle, they said. But I knew. Megan had gotten to them first. She always knew how to sound believable, calm, convincing, untouchable. And just like that, my words became the ramblings of a lonely old woman. No one believed me. The lake became the only thing that made sense. Every secret she kept, every lie she told, somehow led back there. Sometimes, at night, I'd stand by the window and watch its reflection in the distance, still, dark, and waiting. The wind would carry faint sounds from the water, a soft splash, a heavy thud, then silence again. And deep down, I felt it. The truth was out there, hidden beneath that calm surface, waiting for me to find it. Have you ever trusted your instincts even when no one else did? Were you right? That night, the air was heavier than usual, as if even the wind didn't want to move. I sat in my living room, pretending to read, though my eyes hadn't touched a single word in hours. Then I heard it, the creak of the front door, the soft footsteps, the unmistakable click of Megan's heels fading toward the garage. My chest tightened. Something in me said, "This is it." I waited until I heard her car start, the quiet hum of the engine fading down the road. I grabbed my keys and followed, keeping my headlights off, staying far enough behind so she wouldn't see me. The streets were empty, just shadows and silence. The moonlight flickered through the trees as I trailed her all the way down the winding road that led to the lake, the same lake where Ethan and I used to fish when he was a boy. The same lake where she'd been disappearing to night after night. She slowed down near the clearing, turned off her headlights, and parked by the old dock. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I pulled over, cut the engine, and crouched low, moving behind the trees. The air was icy against my face. From where I hid, I could see her silhouette under the faint light of the moon. She walked to the trunk and struggled to lift something large, rectangular, heavy. It hit the ground with a dull, dragging sound. My stomach clenched. She bent down and adjusted her grip, breathing hard. Then I saw it, a suitcase. The same one Ethan used to take on business trips. Its leather edges glistened in the dim light as she started pulling it toward the water. The gravel crunched beneath its weight, every sound scraping against my nerves. Step by step, she dragged it closer until she reached the edge. Then she stopped. The night was silent, except for the faint lapping of the water and her uneven breathing. She looked around, once to her left, once to her right. My heart froze. I pressed myself deeper behind the tree, afraid to breathe. Then, she whispered so low I barely heard it, but I'll never forget the words. "Now you'll never come back." Her voice was calm, cold, final. And then, without a second of hesitation, she pushed. The suitcase hit the water with a heavy splash, sending ripples across the surface. For a moment, it floated just long enough for the moonlight to catch its edges. Then, slowly, it began to sink. The water swallowed it, inch by inch, until only the ripples remained. I stood frozen, staring, unable to move. My mind screamed at me to go home, to call someone, anyone, but my heart wouldn't let me. Megan turned back toward her car, her face expressionless. She opened the door, slid inside, and drove off into the darkness without looking back. Her taillights faded until they were nothing but a distant red glow. For a moment, everything was quiet again, too quiet. And then I ran. The cold air burned my throat as I stumbled toward the dock, my shoes slipping on the wet ground. The water shimmered under the moon, and for a second, I thought it was over. But then I saw it, a faint glimmer just beneath the surface. The suitcase hadn't sunk completely. I kicked off my shoes and waded into the freezing water, my breath catching from the shock. Each step felt heavier than the last. The water reached my waist, then my chest, but I kept going. My hands stretched out until they brushed against the slick fabric of the suitcase. It was heavier than I imagined. My arms shook as I tried to pull it closer. My fingers slipped, but I held on. I dragged it inch by inch, coughing, gasping as the icy water bit into my skin. My heart felt like it might burst. Finally, with one last pull, I got it onto the shore. I fell to my knees beside it, panting, my hands trembling uncontrollably. The suitcase was soaked, locked, and dripping with dark water. My chest ached as I fumbled with the latches, my fingers numb. I could barely breathe. When it finally gave way, I froze. The sound of the zipper echoed louder than it should have. My hands trembled as I slowly opened the lid. And then, the world stopped. The air around me seemed to vanish. My breath caught somewhere between my chest and my throat. I thought I was ready for anything, but not for what I saw inside that suitcase. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're still watching without subscribing, ask yourself this: if you were the only one who knew the truth, would you walk away or would you stay to see how it ends? Don't be the one who turns away now. Hit that subscribe button before it's too late. For a long moment, I couldn't move. My breath came in shallow bursts as the moonlight fell over the open suitcase. I expected no, feared to see my son, but what lay inside was something that clawed deeper into my chest. It was a mannequin, dressed head to toe in Ethan's clothes. The same flannel shirt he wore every Sunday morning when he came over for coffee. The same shoes I'd bought him last Christmas. Its face was blank, pale plastic, but someone had placed Ethan's wristwatch on it. That familiar silver watch with his initials engraved beneath. I felt my throat tighten. Beneath the mannequin were scattered photographs, all of Ethan smiling, laughing, caught mid-moment. But every single one of them had been slashed through with a knife. Long, jagged lines across his face, tearing through the life he once had. My hands trembled as I lifted one of the photos, its edges still damp. And then I saw it, a small, blood-stained envelope tucked beneath the mannequin's arm. I hesitated before pulling it free. My fingers shook as I turned it over. In red ink, smeared as though written in a rush, were 6 words that made the ground beneath me tilt. "He's gone, and you'll be next if you don't stay quiet." I stumbled backward, my legs weak, the air refusing to fill my lungs. The world blurred as I fell to my knees, clutching the note to my chest. I remember screaming Ethan's name once, twice before my voice broke into sobs that wouldn't stop. My body shook as cold water soaked through my clothes, but all I could feel was grief clawing at my ribs. It didn't make sense. None of it did. Why the mannequin? Why his things? Why that message? When the police arrived, called by a neighbor who'd heard me crying, I could barely speak. They looked at the suitcase, then at me, exchanging glances I'd seen before. Pity. Doubt. One of them sighed and said, "Ma'am, there's no evidence of foul play. It might just be some kind of prank." A prank? My son was missing, and my daughter-in-law had thrown his belongings into a lake, and they called it a prank. I begged them to look closer, to test the stains, to check Megan's story. But they left, promising to file a report. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the note. "He's gone. And you'll be next." My mind replayed every strange thing I'd seen: the bleach in the garage, the locked basement door, the missing ring. It all connected now, but not enough to prove anything. I knew then that if I wanted answers, I'd have to find them myself. I started going through Ethan's old things, the drawers he'd used when he stayed over, the boxes in the attic. That's when I found the first clue. A series of printed bank statements tucked into one of his books. There were large withdrawals, thousands of dollars at a time, all signed in Ethan's name. But the accounts they came from were ones he'd never told me about. The money was being funneled into an account under Megan's name. The next morning, I went to the bank myself, pretending to be updating Ethan's contact information. When the clerk checked the record, she frowned and said quietly, "Ma'am, are you aware your son transferred ownership of a property recently?" My stomach dropped. A property? Ethan didn't own any property beyond his house. But the clerk showed me a deed signed over to Megan, dated just 2 weeks before Ethan vanished. Something was deeply wrong. I reached out to an old friend, a retired police detective who now worked as a private investigator. His name was Carl. When I told him everything, he didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he said, "Let me look into it. But Grace, don't talk to her again. Not yet." For days, I waited in silence. Each tick of the clock echoed louder than the last. Megan stopped by once to drop off a bill, her face calm, polite, too calm. I could barely meet her eyes. A week later, Carl called. His voice was low. "Grace, you were right." My heart nearly stopped. He explained that Ethan had recently confronted Megan about missing funds from his joint accounts and her connection to a man named Ryan, who'd been arrested for financial fraud 3 years earlier. Ethan had uncovered documents proving Megan's affair and her involvement in transferring large sums of money into offshore accounts. According to a neighbor's testimony, there had been shouting the night before Ethan disappeared. And then, silence. Carl managed to obtain surveillance footage from a nearby gas station. It showed Megan's car at 3:47 a.m., heading toward the lake the same night Ethan vanished. In the trunk, the shape of something large, heavy, covered with a tarp. Then came the most chilling part. Using specialized equipment, Carl's team combed the area around the lake. Beneath the waterline, near the dock, they found traces of DNA Ethan's. It wasn't much, just a few fragments. But it was enough. Enough to prove he had been there. Enough to confirm my worst fear. When the authorities finally reopened the investigation, Megan didn't seem surprised. She didn't cry. She didn't protest. Instead, she packed a bag and quietly planned to leave the state. But Carl had been one step ahead. With his help, police tracked her down at a motel near the Arizona border. She had fake IDs, multiple credit cards, and $90,000 in cash. When they brought her in, I was there. She looked at me once, not a flicker of guilt, not a trace of remorse, just calm, steady eyes that said everything I already knew. I remember thinking, evil doesn't always shout. Sometimes, it smiles. As they led her away, she turned her head slightly and said, almost sweetly, "You should have stayed quiet, Grace." I didn't reply. I couldn't. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut was the only thing that brought me peace that day. I stood there, watching as she disappeared through the police station doors, and whispered to myself, "Ethan, we did it. She'll never hurt anyone again." If you've been watching this far, you already know truth always finds its way to the surface, just like that suitcase did. Before we go on, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. And if you've listened this long without subscribing, ask yourself, would you walk away from the truth if it was staring you in the face? Hit that subscribe button because what comes next will leave you speechless. When Megan finally stood before the court, the truth that had once been buried under silence began to surface piece by piece, word by word. She didn't look frightened. She didn't look broken. Instead, she sat there in her pale gray suit, calm as ever, her eyes fixed on some invisible point across the courtroom. The prosecutors presented everything: the bank transfers, the surveillance footage, the DNA near the lake, the letters Ethan had written to his attorney just days before his disappearance. Each piece fit together like shards of glass, forming the image of who she really was. During the 5th day of the trial, the courtroom fell into a silence so thick you could hear the clock ticking. Megan's attorney rose, whispered something to her, and then she stood. Her voice was steady when she spoke, but there was no remorse in it. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she said, her words slicing through the room. "He found out. He wouldn't stop asking questions. We argued. He pushed me. I pushed back. He fell. I panicked." She paused, her tone flat. "I thought if I made it look like he left, no one would ever find out." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I couldn't breathe. Every muscle in my body trembled. For so long, I'd imagined her words, rehearsed them in my head, but hearing them aloud felt like a wound reopening. "The suitcase," she explained, "wasn't his body. It was a performance, a twisted attempt to erase him, to destroy every trace of his memory, his favorite shirt, his photographs, his watch. She wanted to make him vanish, not just from the world, but from our hearts." Weeks later, during a search organized near the lake, the police found what was left of my son. His remains were buried not far from the water, the very place I had stood that night, calling his name into the cold darkness. When they told me, I didn't cry, not right away. There are some pains that go beyond tears. Instead, I sat in silence, clutching the ring I'd found in her drawer, Ethan's wedding band, the one she'd taken off him before the end. At the sentencing, Megan stood once more. The judge asked if she had anything to say. She looked directly at me for the first time since that night and said quietly, "I never meant for it to go this far." I remember feeling something shift inside me, not anger anymore, not grief, just an emptiness where love used to live. I realized then that forgiveness wasn't for her. It was for me. Because holding on to hate would only make me drown in the same darkness that took Ethan from me. When the verdict was read guilty on all counts, I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer, not of victory, but of release. Justice had come, not in the way I imagined, but enough to let me breathe again. The sound of the gavel striking the bench echoed through the room like thunder, and I felt, for the first time in years, that my son could finally rest. Months later, after the trial, I adopted Ethan's son, little Jamie. He had his father's eyes kind, curious, full of light. I moved us into a smaller house near the hills, somewhere peaceful, somewhere where the ghosts couldn't find us. Every evening, we'd sit on the porch, and he'd ask me to tell him stories about his dad. I told him about the time Ethan caught his first fish at the lake, about how he used to laugh when the wind blew too hard, and about the way he'd always put everyone else first. One evening, Jamie looked up at me and said, "Grandma, do you think Dad can see us?" I smiled, feeling tears sting my eyes, and said, "Yes, sweetheart." And he's proud of us, proud that we never stopped searching for the truth. Years passed, and though the pain never left completely, it changed shape, became something softer, something I could carry without breaking. Every year, on the anniversary of his death, I walk down to that same lake. The water looks different now, calmer, lighter somehow. I bring a single white flower, toss it into the water, and watch it float away. As I stand there, the reflection of the moon shimmering on the surface, I whisper, "The lake took my son, but it also revealed the truth. I just wish I'd listened to my gut sooner." And I mean it. I kept Ethan's ring not as a reminder of death, but of truth. It sits on my nightstand, glinting softly in the morning light. Some nights, I hold it in my palm and imagine him there beside me, telling me everything will be okay. Before this story ends, I want to ask you something. If your heart ever whispers that something isn't right, will you listen? Or will you wait until it's too late? Don't ignore your instincts, and don't leave without subscribing. Because if you've watched this far and still haven't, maybe you're afraid of seeing truths that hit too close to home. Prove that you're braver than silence. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more stories that remind us how fragile and how powerful love can be. The years have a way of softening pain, but they never erase it. Every morning when I wake, I still expect to hear Ethan's voice, that easy laugh, that warmth that could turn any bad day into something worth saving. But the house is quiet now. Only the wind moves through the curtains, carrying memories that never really left. Sometimes I walk by the lake not out of grief anymore, but out of gratitude. Gratitude that the water which once held my worst nightmare also became the mirror that revealed the truth. The ripples still move the same way they did that night, but now when I look into them, I don't see fear. I see strength. I see the reflection of a mother who refused to be silenced. People often say, mothers shouldn't meddle, that we should let our children live their own lives, make their own choices, and fight their own battles. But what they never tell you is that sometimes a mother's instinct is the only thing standing between truth and tragedy. It's that whisper that keeps you awake at night, that heavy feeling you can't explain, that voice in your chest saying something's wrong. I ignored that voice once, thinking I was just being overprotective. I told myself Ethan was happy, that Megan loved him. But the truth was there all along, hidden beneath polite smiles and practiced words. If I had listened sooner, maybe things would have been different. Maybe my son would still be here. Still, in my quiet moments, I remind myself, silence doesn't protect us. It only buries the truth deeper. If your heart ever whispers that something isn't right, listen. Don't wait for the evidence to scream. Don't let fear of being wrong stop you from saving someone you love. Because evil rarely looks like a monster. Sometimes it looks like family. Sometimes it smiles at you across the dinner table. And sometimes it hides behind the person you trusted most. Now, when I look at Jamie, Ethan's little boy running through the yard, laughing the way his father once did, I know that life, no matter how broken, has a way of finding light again. He doesn't know the whole story yet. One day, I'll tell him. But for now, he just knows that his dad was brave and his grandma never gave up. I carry that truth like a flame, small, steady, unbreakable. Because that's what love really is. Not the absence of pain, but the courage to face it. People say mothers shouldn't meddle, But sometimes, a mother's instinct is all that stands between truth and tragedy. If your heart ever whispers that something's wrong, listen. What would you have done if you were me? Would you have followed her that night? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true stories that remind us sometimes the truth hides where we least expect it.